Hello, my name is Lucas Squirmeyer. I am the opinion editor at the Des Moines Register. Joining me today are Carol Hunter, the executive editor of the Register, and opinion columnist Reka Basu. Our guest who you see on the screen is Michael Franken, a candidate for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate in Iowa. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
There are three candidates in that race, and there are two candidates in a Republican primary, including incumbent Senator Chuck Grassley. Why don't you take it away, Admiral, and tell us what's on your mind today.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. So we are in month, quick math, public math here, 6 or so in the campaign, and we are cresting, I think, at about the right time. We are fully staffed, and we had the same issues in staffing as hardware stores and other places in Iowa. It was a challenge to get enough staff members, but now we're full up. And that's going swimmingly. The most positive thing, besides a host of things I could say, is that we've got this group of volunteers in the state who have been ardent in their support, and for which I'm very heartfelt grateful for. And that has, I think, given me some affirmation that this was the right thing to do, and to run for office again. Very pleased to have this opportunity.
Let's start out talking about revenue a little bit. You said one of the first things we need to do is repeal the 2017 tax cuts. I'm curious if there's a specific reason you favor that over some of the proposals that had support in the Build Back Better measure.
Yeah, well, so the Build Back Better, I was a big fan of it. I could understand why the size of that bill deterred people, unfortunately. And I think perhaps the Biden administration would do well to cut it up in more bite-sized slices that are harder to confront, or mostly on the Republican side, but also get those understandable things across to the population so that they become supporters of this in a more verbal sense. Well, regarding how to fair share a tax code, I do believe that the Trump tax cut was uniformly ill-advised at the time. And I would prefer that we look at tax fairness from the top down versus the manner in which the Trump administration proceeded. And barring repealing that which is in the Build Back Better plan, I'm absolutely supporting of that as well.
When you talk about cutting Build Back Better into pieces, could you rank the top one or two pieces that should have been split off into priorities?
I think those that look specifically at the family structure to bring up the quality of life in that, more of a functional area, and highlight those and say, this is what this is about, and this is what this is about, versus making an amalgamation. I think that that had a tendency to get lost in translation, and was unfortunate because it didn't develop the support in society that I was looking for, that I kind of felt like Americans would have done had they known the intricacies of the bill.
Another one of your policy proposals is to lift the cap on Social Security taxation. I'd be curious, maybe even like an elevator pitch style, how do you sell that to those who would take the bigger hit from?
Well, so Social Security being capped at an income of 147,000, it's hard to justify that for those people with an income of something less than 6 figures, and knowing that the growth curve of those in the uber wealthy in America has been exponential, has it not? And yet they are excused from a program which is in dire situations. I mean, matter of fact, in extremis, and I believe the latest number is by 2034, Either the proceeds of those working will be living off the adults in the working class then, which will require a higher Social Security tax, or they'll take a concomitant lower monthly Social Security feed. Why we wouldn't do what I think is a demonstrably easy thing to do is to raise the cap to infinity, and let those who, that extra 6%, does it really matter? And for some it may, but in the aggregate, I doubt if it will. And as I see it, if you're a broad-minded multi-millionaire, the reason he or she are there is because of the assistance of the greater America. Our educational system, our infrastructure, those who have worked either above us, below us, with us through the years. That's why they're fortunate enough, in many cases, why they're in this fortuitous position in life. So it's everybody's effort to ensure that people are cared for properly and in a dignified manner in their years. And I believe if we want to address various aspects of healthcare associated with people who are older Americans, then we ought to look at other ways to help our medical care system. Patients, having so many people living on a pretty fringe situation. And for instance, my personal family, when my parents died, they worked all their lives well into their 70s in a machine shop. And when my father finally died, there was nothing left. There's zero inheritance, zero other than memories, pictures, and some articles of clothes, because it all went to the retirement account and or the retirement home, and the meagerness of the Social Security wasn't enough.
We've been speaking with some of your opponents about biofuels. Here in Iowa, Governor Reynolds signed a bill on Tuesday that requires retailers to sell E15 and expands biodiesel tax credits. It's a broadly popular bill. I think there were 3 votes against it in the Senate. Do you agree to about that was a good measure, or where does our conversation need to be on biofuels right now?
Well, I was in a fabulous location here, and from our energy production, electrical energy production writ large, and ethanol can be part of that in a more broad sense. So, I mean, I'm fine with the inclusion of E15 all year long. That's okay. I don't believe in the future, though, we ought to hinge the vitality of the ethanol market on what you put in your gas tank. It needs to be expanded for alternate sources. And I would like to take the lead in developing those alternate sources.
Can you expand on that at all based on what you've learned and read?
Yeah, well, I was the chief of legislative affairs in the Department of the Navy when we spent a day on biofuels. Navy-wide, ships, aircraft, you name it. Infinitely doable. So the aircraft industry, for instance, those, we're the flyover state, right? That is a substantial source of carbon. We could augment JP5, JP8 as it's called in military terms, airplane fuel as an additive. It's certainly possible. Shipping in America, shipping in coastal waters, we can make those requirements where ships entering the United States can have cleaner fuels. We should have done that decades ago. All you must do in Long Beach is look at the sky, and you can tell where the ships are coming from. It's a dark grayness. So there are areas in society that could immediately use an influx of ethanol. Moreover, rather than putting it expressly in your gas tank, we should consider using it as a standby fuel to fill in for our renewables of wind and solar. And I see much like the Brazilians do, burning this in gas turbine generators to help with the electrical grid. And if we do this well, the byproducts associated with burning ethanol in gas turbine generators as a standby fuel, as a corn drying fuel, as a produce byproduct for that, it makes regional production areas for electricity. It provides an opportunity to use the heat generated with ethanol and making electricity to heat grow houses 12 months out of the year, which affords Iowans to go back to our heritage, which was growing agriculture to the farm table versus through middlemen scattered worldwide. We have this opportunity, and certainly ag needs to see a renaissance of sorts. We know this must occur, and this is one of our opportunities to do so.
So I'm going to shift to a more macro level question. It's one that I asked one of your opponents this week. On the spectrum of democratic outlooks, going from Joe Manchin at one end to AOC at the other, where would you place yourself as a Democrat in terms of your general philosophy?
I would be a jagged line across the topical areas that is formulated, curated by experience, a really worldwide perspective, rural Sioux County perspective, Lebanon, Iowa, which it typifies what Hillary Clinton said. It takes a village, that very much of a village where everybody knew your business, and happily so. That type of outlook compared to something really broad, working with large entities overseas and being responsible for large organizations. It depends what topic, and I can tell you on that sliding scale where I would be. Environmentally, I am pretty ardent that we need to do things, and this is a great opportunity for Iowa to be at the forefront. For wage growth, they're one and the same. For social programs such as the type of medical care that I had for 40 years in the military, that should be a God-given right from birth to end of life. So I don't know where that is progressive. I find that commonsensical more than anything else.
What about LGBTQ rights, and what about social justice around racial issues?
Well, I am as common sense leaning forward as I think you can be. I believe firmly in a basic democratic principle that you care as much for everyone you don't know as those you do, as those close to you. And I don't have any issues whatsoever with LGBTQ rights, and believe they should have the same expectations as an American as everyone. And I wouldn't know why we even have a conversation that is ulterior to that. Women's rights, same thing there. And the next thing to speak about is abortion rights, and reproductive rights. I am a firm believer that we are fundamentally wrong for doing anything except for codifying Roe v. Wade. And as to the line, where the line is drawn in the time cycle of gestation, that is something for women to decide and their care provider.
So what if this draft ruling goes through? What then for the country? What then for women's right to choose? Where do we go from here?
I believe this will lead to a repeal of the filibuster and a forced majority rule on America, which is fundamentally about time, where it gets codified into law.
You think that would happen this fall?
No, I believe we would wait until after the primaries, and this would be on the docket next year, which double downs on why we need to win the Senate.
That's sure.
Existentially.
That actually was going to be one of my questions. You obviously don't plan for this, but you could win the nomination and the election and be in the minority party, or at least have a Republican-controlled House. What principles do you bring to the table in, compromising for 2 years of legislation you'd seek in that scenario?
I have been contrary to what the decision in a large group has decided thousands of times in my career, and been accepting of that. But I'm also a firm believer in some basic precepts that Ted Kennedy taught me when I worked for him in the 90s. There were no things which that you couldn't compromise on. And you need to get involved, and you need to get that incremental movement and something in every bill. And I believe if anybody can compromise with people on the Hill and get a progressive perspective in a bill, it would be me. I think my history would have, my resume would help that, my perspective would help that, and my outlook on what's best for this generation and the succeeding generations, irrespective of outside influences, would be well received. And I believe the Renaissance is due for the Republican Party as well.
As you've been going around and speaking to prospective voters, have you spoken to many past Grassley voters who would consider voting Democratic this time, voting for you?
Yes. Measured in 10s and 20s and 30s. Many.
And what are you hearing from them? What is it that's turning them off this time?
There's some ageism, and I leave that alone. That's not for me to decide. That's a personal choice of sorts. There are those who are exhausted with the what they see as a common theme in rural America, where large ag entities and the producers have squeezed the livestock breeders, and the row croppers are at the their margins have been squeezed by that big rainbow of other entities, and the consumer and the farmer are the two who are most felt in ag today, and yet record profits across the board, record profits. They are disgusted by that. Another issue which has been raised by my Republican friends, people I rode the school bus with for an hour a day, twice, they said, we really need a Democrat as one of our 2 senators to introduce progressive, forward-leaning bills, much like we had in the 80s when we had this opportunity to do so. And we don't have that. And we can't do some things, especially with ethanol, because of the over-incumbents with big oil. So they trust me. They have a respect for the common sense decision making, which has been asked of me for 40-some years, and they trust him less to do something of substance. So So I got a note after a get together, meet and greet in Davenport a week or so ago, and this guy slipped me a note. He said, "I'm a diehard Republican. I'll not vote for a Democrat, but boy, oh boy, if I was in the RNC, I'd spend every penny I can against you because you are a problem for the Republicans, and I think you're going to do very well. Good luck."
Ah,
I just thought that was kind of interesting.
yeah.
And so with that person like that, I probably can't win that person's vote, but I bet I can speak well with that person's spouse or his children.
Looking at the maps of recent statewide elections, Democrats have generally not done well in rural Iowa. What do you think about your candidacy connects with rural Iowans, and what do you think you can really do to help bolster economic development in rural Iowa?
The latter is infinity and hard, but doable. I believe in it. The former, I grew up rural, and will always have that perspective. Small town Iowa. I believe the jobs I've had, from slaughterhouse to machine shop, farmhand, working in a small law firm, etc., all those things will be helpful. Also, the fact that my wife and I are adoptive parents, and we've gone through all those trials that many couples do, including being responsible for someone who had a mental health issues, brain health issues, and all of that is relatable. So in course of conversation, from what it's like to be in rural America to the challenges of getting your crops in on the right time, I can at least speak to people about the range of topics. And for instance, in Decatur County, Iowa, in Leon, 2,100 people or something like that, I have questions from the the implications of going organic farming below the earthworm and how soon that would come about, and scientific stuff like that, which just is really, really up my alley. I love to talk about those things, to the expansion of the energy grid, to what happens with the minimum wage going up, et cetera. That's what rural Iowa wants to talk about. And I don't prevaricate. I answer questions. And people appreciate that. So regarding getting out there, the biggest challenge is getting people to come in and talk and listen. That's the biggest challenge. So the last time I had an event in Northwest Iowa, it was standing room only, and I can generally pick out the Republicans because they give me a golf clap versus something more significant, and I'm okay with that. The fact that they showed up is meaningful. The issue is getting them to show up, but that won't work unless you're there. So, for instance, the last week of the campaign before the primary, we are on the road, 5 speaking engagements a day, sleeping in a different place every night. That's what it takes. And I never say no to a radio station or a interview. Getting them to say, sure, come on in. That's the challenge number one. And the articles have resoundingly been positive. For instance, a radio station in Lamar's, Iowa, and they advertise a large listening audience. And the persons kept saying, this is an admiral, and he's from Sioux County, and he's a Democrat. Kept saying that. And I thought, oh, that was a siren call for you to, protect your loved ones. What do we have here? Shut the radio volume down. But it was actually, I sensed that it was a nod of approval from him, that this person who's my age, from rural Primgar or Hospers, thought the same way as I did about many of these issues, and was just surprised to have this opportunity. And I think that's shared in rural Iowa. We have history. as a state. And I proudly talked about Iowa history, and people, regardless of their political perspective on things, they remember that history. The state that had a very progressive bent to it and had an education system to match.
How do you explain why Iowa's Republicans have fallen so heavily in line behind Trump? They used to be more independent minded, no?
So those were your words. I do believe that there's some fearfulness in them, that they don't want the backlash associated with it. I do believe the success of the Trump messaging that's heard in every waiting room, in every bar in the state, has a tendency to make a long-term, I'll call it something as significant as a psychological effect on people, but it certainly is. It's a messaging. It's why we do that for psychological operations. The posturing of messages repeatedly, small, simple little quips, not really balanced necessarily, isn't meant to be. That's what is done. And we're seeing the culmination of a 25-year plus effort to change this perspective in rural Iowa. And it's taken root. It's taken hold. And we are not the same state we used to be. They've signed up for Trump because there's a donor base there. There's a dark money base there. It's this false appreciation of God and honor and commitment and military, etc. Few of which are the attributes of Donald Trump, if any. And yet they conflate the two, and this becomes this unquestioned mantra of belief system. I'm disappointed in their individual thought. So here I'm in a bar. It's 11 o'clock at night. It's full of mostly Dordt College students, maybe some Northwestern College students. And the bartender knows I'm running for office, and hey, we got a Democrat. He's from here. So we've got a lot of looks of the turning of the heads. And someone said, "Why are you a Democrat?" And I said, well, I went through the litany of things from women's suffrage to the Affordable Care Act to the GI Bill and all these things. I had them memorized. I took down them. And I said, so that is why I'm a Democrat, because I want to make your life, as we have made your parents' lives, better. And they said, and I said, tell me, as a Republican, what has that done for society, for you and your parents? Name one issue. It's a Jeopardy moment. And they participated. This large group, 20, 30 young adults. And finally I said, clean air, clean water, 1972, Nixon administration, which was repealed by Trump. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. And so I got on my soapbox and said, listen, you're of that mind and of that intellect where you were born into a family structure, a religious structure, a school structure that has imprinted you with a belief system, which is all wonderful, but you're now, as an adult, it's time to make your own judgments. And it's not only your capacity to do so, but it's a necessity for you in life to weigh where you were so that you know where you're going. And everybody was receptive. Not everybody, but the vast majority, I mean, handshaking, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, nobody bought me a beer.
Did they applaud you? Was there a standing
No, but I mean,
ovation?
a couple of people said, "Oh, it's cool, yeah." So it's okay, it's doable, but you have to be relatable and you have to be there.
One thing I'm curious about, given your experience in the Navy for so many years, your concerns about manufacturing in the U.S. in order to support troops and whether or not really supporting manufacturing in a robust way is needed, A, to create jobs, but also to help our military.
Well, a couple of the enactions of the Defense Production Act were specifically for that in years past. There are some industries which we need to be rather covetous of and keep them local, keep them in the United States. Certainly from software to some material science, some simulations, and a host of others. We, and more broadly speaking in the United States, have done what I think is inimical to the well-being of citizens here by exporting so much expertise, starting with making of plastic toys in the 60s to now supercomputers in the 2020s to other countries. And that's why we've got these supply chain problems. And it's patently obvious that the fact that China is still having difficulties coming out of the pandemic have impact here and cause much of our inflationary tendencies in the United States. It's basic. You got more money than you have goods and services to apply them for, and here we are. That's why we have 7 point some inflation. We let too much go. And so, another story. So we are the senior couple on this facility in Germany, and my wife would give welcome bags to couples coming, and I would always slip in a can opener, German-made can opener, and it was a beautiful piece of machinery for anybody that needs to open a can. And I'd get questioned, why is that? I said, well, this is a 4.5 euro can opener made in Germany by a small factory where the workers drive Skodas, Audis, Volkswagens, and they've got a living wage with a retirement and healthcare. Why can't we do that in America? Tell me why. And it's because we can. But we found that it's easier to export that, keep the corporate structure here, and it's good for earnings to minimize all the associated efforts going into it, and c'est la vie. That's a fundamental flaw of capitalism and the rapacious manner of looking for profits over sensibilities. And there's a whole bunch of industries in the United States where what you're getting to is the resilience of industries, where resilience needs to be designed in. And it's not efficiency that we're looking for, it's efficacy of an industry. A food source, we saw this in the pandemic, pharmaceuticals, baby food, infant food, perfect example where you have a near monopoly of a single company, which I checked their financials, from 39 to 7% profit quarter after quarter going back for more than a year. And yet we have a single source that has caused inaction of quite significant measures to compensate for baby's milk. This is an example of broad capitalism run amok.
So what do you do?
Depends what industry. Food industry, in this case, I would open up importation of baby formulas. And if you look at the ingredients, and I did this, look at the ingredients in baby formula. How many of those are imported? I don't know of any. So how is it that a company in France can make baby formula and ship it to the United States cheaper than we can make it here, when we've got significantly less expensive transportation means and power. Why is that? What's wrong with America? This is time for thinkers.
Have you been a victim of, do you believe, disinformation campaigns? And how would you approach regulating or not regulating social media companies?
So is this personal or on the campaign path?
We'll start with on the campaign path.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's always somebody who's trying to meeken, a military term, gouge your way in on various networks and you know, doing exploratory stuff. There's always that. There's bots out there that constantly hyperventilate and do things. The best thing to do is nothing. The problem is when you these some of these goofball things, you have to do something because there's a believability index which is too damn high not to. Nothing has been significant until after this interview airs. But I'm very aware of the implications of this. I headed up a high technology task force some years ago that looked at the full spectrum cyber media manipulation, critical infrastructure denigration, from assassinations to street demonstrations that go awry, and a series of things, space, transportation issues, the whole spectrum. I headed up that task force for Department of Defense, and I am aware of probably something, incidentally, that you would like your senator to be well versed in. I understand what can happen with media manipulation and social manipulation in particular. I don't believe, I believe the government has a role as a refugee, or I'm sorry, refugee, as a referee in this matter. And it needs to be an active participant in deciding what is proper and what's not. And for too long, we've let this been the domain of industry and only tried to pick up the pieces after the fact, which has prompted this Elon Musk action, which I'm not a fan of. Probably doing it for the right reasons, but for the wrong purposes. Or I just don't care for a single individual to have control of that. Nor should anyone else.
That's pretty fraught, that referee role, it seems to me. I mean, we had just this week kind of a proposed mechanism dissolved, and there's a lot of recriminations about the Biden administration's proposed disinformation board. I mean, what are one or two of the?
I'm not aware of that, so I would have to do some homeschooling on that.
I understand that, but what are a couple of the principles for refereeing that?
Well, I mean, let's go back to the basic truth doctrine. And if you're a purveyor of mistruths, knowingly, should you be open for litigation for those who are harmed? I believe words matter. Words matter as much as actions matter. And I'm ever so happy to hold people to account for their words, to include our past president. I think this is, it's like the old definition of some more unsavory things. You know it when you see it. This is a new frontier. Not doing something about it soon will only make it worse in the future, in my estimation. And the protocols, I think, are well understood. It's just defining where those fences and walls are.
Congress best suited to do that?
Congress. Congress needs to show something of more forward-leaning significance in their decision-making, in my estimation, before I would say yes to that. Government agency of sorts, perhaps. Please don't give it to DOD.
Why not, to be explicit about?
Because it's far more of a civilian issue in society than it is a defense issue. We need to keep that segregated. I'm not so sure why we've given so much of the cyber mission to the Department of Defense either.
One more point about baby formula. Do you feel like the White House and the rest of the federal government has had the appropriate urgency with this problem?
I think the urgency is necessitated because of the criticality of past actions. And, you know, when you're driving a ship around in coastal waters, et cetera, you never want to be put in a bad situation because it was easy to do. Playing a game of pool, you never want to leave yourself a bad shot. That's what we did. That's what we do with some industries. We put ourselves in a situation where only significant action is necessary, like the Defense Production Act. I think baby formula is just one of a couple of commodities, which toilet paper for one, you know, as you recall, that will, you know, obviously it's a little bit different. It's a life-saving aspect. But I do realize, and I'll go as a broad-minded, a worldwide person, I also know what they do for baby formula in places like Namibia and Tajikistan. And so there are gap fillers that we can do. But I would like to see more industries involved in it, and so that Abbott Laboratories doesn't necessarily make 39% quarter to quarter. I think that's pretty ridiculous as well.
I think we asked this a couple of years ago, but would you support legislation to establish term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court or to change the number of justices?
Not the number of justices, but term limits in the Supreme Court, yes. Indeed.
18 years is that number that's thrown out. That sounds about right.
That sounds like a good number.
To what end?
You mean, why would we be doing this?
Yes.
I think the one's mental faculties, and I see this in myself, and everybody does that I know of. As time goes on, you become more experienced, you become more broad, but perhaps you become a little too set in your ways unless you approach each day with an open book, trying to grasp as much as you possibly can. I can't say everybody has that capabilities, and I think that book, as time goes on, becomes a narrower perspective. I also don't like that end game where it's played for political purposes. Let's make it just a known and move forward with that known, so everybody has an opportunity to get the most qualified versus the most apparent for the party in power.
So would that also be an argument for term limits on senators?
Unless we change, didn't want to say this, but unless we change the manner in which we elect our elected officials, money, dark money, where incumbency rules 90-some% of the time, where the person who wins because they have the most money 90-some% of the time, we've lost the ability to have a meritocracy. And we've perverted the system where substantive debate becomes safe debate so that you don't do anything negative. And we don't understand the way people think. And we don't get the necessary people in there who have that commitment, that broad-mindedness. So, yes, unless we change the manner in which we fund elections, I'm a fan of 2 6-year terms and then get the hell out of office, and you may not come back. And you may not ever be a lobbyist. Go work for an industry, that's fine. But the best thing to do is, this is a pivot in life. This is a knee in life where you give to your fellow citizens and you're not spending. I was called by a senator this past week and she said, you know, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. I just want to get an update on the campaign. And she says, well, I said, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm doing call time. At least 12 hours a week. Sitting senator. And I heard other senators do it more. Certainly House members. House members do it way more. Let's let them work. Let's let them how about this? Shocking. Have them read the bill and know what's in it. And if they don't get the bill read, push it back to committee and say, give me a more substantive summation so I can actually read this thing. I want them to work and be broad-minded and insightful on what they're putting their signature on. Instead of ensuring you've got job security by calling for $2,900 from somebody who doesn't necessarily want to get that call.
Well, we are very grateful for you taking your time this afternoon.
Big downer there.
Sometimes that's the circumstance. I want to tell people watching that there's more coverage of all our primary elections at DesMoinesRegister.com. And thank you for watching.
Thank you all.